Deseret News Rewind is presented by Heidemann and Associates, a full-service law firm dedicated to winning for you. Call them now for a free consultation. Welcome in Deseret News Rewind. Dusty Litster, Dane, Stewart, as always, presented by Heidemann and Associates, but brought to you by the Utah Army National Guard.
That's right, Dusty. And hey, you know what we're going to say next. If you're trying to figure out that next step in your life, but you don't quite know how you're going to pay for it, or maybe you don't know what it is, check out the Utah Army National Guard. Over 150 different career path options available, and up to $20,000 in signing bonus, as well as educational assistance available through the Utah Army National Guard. To learn more, visit nationalguard.com.
And as we mentioned before, if you're a frontline worker, someone dealing with the coronavirus, our friends at Heidemann Associates are willing to do a full will for you, everything for free. So it's a flat rate for those of us who aren't frontline people, so you're not paying by the hour for your lawyers and things like that. It's a flat rate. But if you are a first line responder, get a hold of our friends at Heidemann Associates. Go to www.utah.law and set it up. Let them know that Deseret News Rewind sent you, and they're going to give you a free will. So I decided to move out of my car and into my basement, so don't worry about that. But we got a great. But we're going top shelf.
Oh man!
Just to let people know what we're going to do going forward. So we're going to try to give you two of these video interviews we've been doing that you saw us do for the our award show. We're going to try to give 2 of those a week. We got a couple other guests we're going to line up for later this week. Not only that, yeah, we're going to go some classics. We're going to pull out some old games and go through those, because what else we need to do here without any sports coming anytime soon?
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, when you think about, Dusty, we talked about this, how many years we've been doing this. Man, there are so many great games and stories that we talk about, and we want a chance to be able to share those a little bit and help, some of us who are down the road a little bit relive some of their high school memories. So we're going to have some fun stuff coming up for you and give you a little peek as well at some of the stories that maybe you aren't quite aware of. And boy, that starts today, huh?
Yes, it does. And so let's go to this. One of our favorite coaches. Probably one of my more favorite coaches, and someone that, you may have hated his teams. You should have loved them, because they put our state absolutely on the map. And that is Coach Quincy Lewis, the former head coach of the Lone Peak Knights. And so good, Dane, as we look at Coach Lewis. So we're like, if we're going to go do this, we'll start with a bang. And Coach Lewis is a great way to start.
He is, and you look at, how we're going to structure some of these. You can't talk to Quincy Lewis and not give him a lot of time. So buckle up, get your popcorn, your soda, whatever snack you want, and get ready for Quincy Lewis.
Well, we're pleased to be joined by, I would say, the most successful head coach, and maybe he'll disagree with that, but the most successful high school basketball coach in Utah, the state of Utah's history, that being a Quincy Lewis. And Coach, we really appreciate you jumping on and spending some time with us today.
Hey, no problem.
Well, first of all, how many dress shoes are you now saving now that you're not coaching and pounding your foot in the ground? And 4,
Jeez, it's amazing. I haven't hardly even put on the dress shirt since I left BYU, I think.
Well, Coach, maybe let's talk a little bit about some of your beginnings, right? I mean, I think everyone, obviously, you built Lone Peak into a absolute powerhouse, 7 state championships, went to BYU, but talk about Lone Peak and really what were some of the key foundational principles that were important to you to instill in that program that really led to some of the long-term success there?
Well, no coach is ever going to accomplish great things without really good players. And I don't care if you're in college or high school, you have to understand that first principle. And so in high school, it starts with how are you going to get good players? And to me, it starts with how you build your program. It doesn't have anything to do with X's or O's or anything like that. The very first, most important thing is starting and getting to know who your best third graders are, and getting them out to camps and knowing their names, and getting them a Gatorade or a trophy, putting your arm around them. Nick Emery was my first third grader that I ever had at Lone Peak. And he won all my trophies that year. He was a thief. And, we kind of built it from there. But we built it from, just grassroots, Lone Peak kids.
It's interesting because when we look at Lone Peak, you took over, if I remember the time right, for Ryan Cuff, and he won a state championship and that kind of stuff. What was that how did you get there? What made you think, hey, I'm going to go into high school coaching? Because I remember right, you were at UVSC before then.
Well, I actually took over for Mike May.
That's right.
Mike had taken over for Ryan Cuff and had been there for 1 year. And I was at UVSC at the time. Well, I'd been there for 5 years. Then I went to Southern Utah for 1 year, and I was at SUU. And we were just kind of in a transition period of what we were going to do. My dad had been a high school head coach for many years. He'd been with Jim Spencer at Provo High. He was his JV coach for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, something like that, during the Devin Durant, Brett Vroman years, Varlin Law, not Varlin, but Vance Law. And then he went to Timpview and was head coach at Timpview for the first 11 years at Timpview, and kind of got Timpview going. And so I knew and had been well versed in high school basketball in the state of Utah. And so it's something that I'd always kind of, wanted to try. And when I was at SUU, we were kind of deciding between doing, just being completely out of coaching and moving on. I had my master's, going to go do a doctorate, or this coaching opportunity at Lone Peak came up, and fortunately my wife said, hey, let's go do it. We can go do the school anytime, and let's just go do it and give it 2 years and see what happens. And so we kind of took a chance, and we took Lone Peak, and it was great. Lone Peak had been kind of up and down in their success in their first 6-7 years, and the year before I got there, they hadn't made the state tournament, which is it may be hard to believe, but they hadn't made the state tournament the year before I got there, and didn't have any returning starters. So we were starting, from ground zero in a lot of ways.
Coach, I love that you called out, let's give it 2 years. I think most of 5A wish that you would have hung to that timeline and just left after a year or two. But when you think about building that program, who are some of the real key contributors that you look back and think, man, he was so pivotal in helping to establish that culture and really helping us to take that brand and build it?
That's a really good question. And building the brand is a really important piece of it, because really as a coach, a lot of times when you get in those camps and you're in open gyms and you're talking to those kids, you're a salesperson. You really are. You are selling what you have. And because you can't take each kid by the hand and work out with them for every hour they need to be working out, you have to sell them on what you hope they want to become. And because once they leave your gym, they have to be motivated to do those things. And so you're really a salesperson in many ways. But really, my first year, like I said, we had no returning stars. We only had 2 kids who had even stepped foot on a varsity floor, that first year's team. And Jackson Emery had been a kid who had made the varsity team as a sophomore the year before, but he didn't even get in one game the whole year. And, he was in a situation where, at that time, he was a 6'1", floppy-haired kid that, and I watched him, and he was wild. He was wild and had a tremendous competitive streak, but he got kicked out about every other game he played in the spring. And he had a little ways to go. But he's one that he believed what I told him, and he went and did it, and he put in all the work, and he was a big piece to getting us started. And we also had some other kids, involved with that group that were seniors. We kept 3 seniors the first year, and we kind of cleaned it out a little bit. And those 3 kids were fantastic. Russ Jackson, Ben Wade, and Brandon Knight, and really helping establish what we were going to become.
And that's a great question that Dane asked, because after Jackson Emery, most people won't remember, the next year you didn't have that immediate just go on, right? Because you won a state championship with Jackson. And then it was our first year covering. You guys went from 4A to 5A. And that transition period was really interesting. But you get to bring in, and I don't know how many J-Dogs you bought this kid or how many times you've taken out for dinner, but Tyler Hawes, he changed your life, didn't he?
Hey, Tyler was, he was, he would have been a 7th grader when I first got to Lone Peak. And you could see, what he was on track to maybe become. And, my first 2 years we had Jackson, and we had a really good year the first year. We couldn't quite get it done. We went 21-2. The second year we did win it. And, really the third year we lost a lot of guys. Tyler was coming in as a freshman. We had a kid named Corey Chase, who was really a good player, but Corey had a lot of injury issues and really didn't have the kind of year that I thought he could have had he been healthy. And so we really struggled Tyler's freshman year. But then obviously his sophomore, junior, and varsity year, it was pretty good.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We'll come back, I'm sure. But, Dusty talked a little bit about Tyler. I just got to ask, and I'm not going to ask you which one is better, but Coach, how is the experience different? How is coaching Tyler and TJ different? How are they different players? And what was that experience of coaching two phenomenal brothers?
They were very, very different players and very different kids. Tyler was just a boy. He just put his head down and he worked his guts out. Was not entitled for anything. That guy was something else. Just a machine, absolute scoring machine, and a highly efficient player. Rebounded. He was fantastic. He's 6'5". He could play him a little bit more inside and outside, which we did. TJ was capable of doing more things. He wasn't quite, the inside type player, mid-range player that Tyler was, but the 3-point shooting, just the natural feel for the game, the ball handling, the passing. And TJ was a little bit more emotional than Tyler. You watch these Jordan Last Dance and see how Jordan got beat up. Yeah, that was Tyler right there. Tyler got beat up and he went to the foul line a lot, and he earned every one of those free throws that he got. But TJ was a lot more different. Tyler's one who didn't say a whole lot during a game, but TJ's one who might get under somebody's skin. He was a little more emotional.
He's more the little brother stereotype. Being a little brother, I understand that one. When you think of that, go ahead, Coach.
Oh, I was just going to say, you talk about little brothers. One of the funniest stories we had at Lone Peak was we had Jackson and Nick was third grade, and we were playing Timpview, who was a nationally ranked team my first year. Played in the second game of the year. They had Chris Miles and Pinniger and all these guys, really good team. And we ended up pulling an upset. And after the game, my wife goes up to Nick, who was in third grade, and she says, "Hey, Nick, do you think you could ever be as good as Jackson is?" And he kind of looked at her like, What are you talking about? Better. And that's just, and that really is the little brother mentality, though, right? They look at their older brother, they look up to him, they're like, "Oh, I'm going to be better than him." Come on. And that actually helped those kids.
100%. I'm the third brother of three, and so I remember that same kind of, I won't say I ever got there, but it was certainly what I thought it was going to be. But that first super teams, we'll get to the 2013 team, but that 2007 team, and that was the one that was kind of the first of its kind, right? 4 of the 5 starters were committed to D1. What was that season like for you? Because that had to feel like that was a new experience. I remember because that was a team we covered very, very closely. Dane and I were really young then. But what was that team like?
It was a team that we, had been building for. And when we started building the Lone Peak program, it wasn't to be nationally ranked or to win a national championship. That's never what it was about. It was about being competitive enough to possibly win a state championship every year, because that's hard enough, right? And it just worked out that was the kind of the first year that we were on the map and we were nationally ranked. And I learned a lot from that year for what happened later. But that team, I felt like we were under a lot of pressure that year. And I think the best team that we ever had to beat in the state, the best team that I ever saw in the state in my time that I was there in those 12 years, was Davis. And they had a fabulous team. And it ended up being a semifinal game. And I'm sure you guys probably remember that one.
The event center,
They hadn't lost a game. And they had maybe four kids who went Division I off that team, but their kids weren't as well known as ours, and we were the ones with the target on our back. But they were a heck of a team. They were a very, very good team, and we pulled one out against those guys. But it was tough because we were kind of the hunted, and if I had to choose or be able to do that season again, I would take a little bit different approach with that group, even though we still won it.
What would you have changed? I'm just curious because I know there was a gag order on interviews. So was that what you would allow? You would allow Bracken Funk to do a little bit more media time?
Yeah, you know what? That was part of it. we had some, internal situations that we needed to handle, with some of our kids, and part of that had to do with attention and things like that, and we had to manage some of those situations. So we made a decision midway through the year that actually, for 4 or 5 weeks, it probably helped us. But the season overall, I think I would just, I think I just open it way more to, to media and to everything, and just embrace the whole situation. And I individually probably wasn't quite ready for what it was, and maybe our players weren't quite either. We were just really young as a program, and being in the spotlight. But I think later, like I said, in 4 or 5 years, we kind of knew how to handle it a little bit better.
Coach, you talk about that Davis program and how good that team was that specific year. When you think back on your time at Lone Peak, who was the coach or the program that was the most difficult to prepare for? That you saw them and you're like, oh man, it's just so tough to go up against, blank high school. Well, who was that for you?
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of guys who do a great job. When I first got to Lone Peak, Provo and Timpview were the programs, with Craig Gurry and Perry Wildeboer. Those guys, they really had it going. And that was kind of the gold standard that we felt like we had to overcome. Later, you look at Jay Welk and what he did at Davis, and Jay was a guy who just was outstanding every year, and is not really the guy that you want to see in the state tournament. Had good players, good coaching, but maybe an underrated guy that I would say every year, and I specifically made sure we played his team every single year. Because I thought he was just a fantastic teacher and coach, and was very difficult to guard, was Jeff Emery at Viewmont. I thought he just did a great job with the talent that he had. And so we always wanted to play them, because I knew that was just going to be tough. We had to play somebody different than ourselves. And, now I joke with Jeff and I say, hey, the last game I ever coached at Lone Peak, you got me fired, So kid hit a shot and beat us. So
I wasn't going to bring that. I was going to wait a little bit to bring that one up.
I was just going to ask, when you think about modern day, who's that coach right now? I mean, that you look out in Utah high school and you think, man, that guy does a really phenomenal job with his program. Understanding there are a lot of those, right? But when you think about, the current landscape, is there anyone who jumps off the mat for you?
Yeah, I think, obviously there's a number of guys who do a good job, but, I look at maybe like Izzy Engel and what he's done at Timpanogos. He's kind of taken that program from the ashes and kind of made them something, and they were nothing before he got there. And so I think he's done a really nice job. As you look in, I'm thinking about who I watched this year, Springville. I think Justin's done a good job with those guys, and how they played this year. He didn't have the most talent for sure, in my mind, but I thought he played exactly how he needed to play to be able to win it with the team that he had. And so there's a few guys like that, that have really done a nice job. And, watching Fremont, I really liked what he did with his group this year and how they played. I thought that was the right way. It reminded me a lot of how we played with TJ his senior year, and what we needed to do with the pieces that were around him. Because there weren't necessarily Division I guys, 5 Division I guys with them. You had a couple of guys who were good, but
just one.
yeah. So obviously that kid, Hall kid, was good.
That's interesting, because I think we'll get to Frank in a minute. When we let's talk about the big team, right? We talked about 07, so 2013. What did you take from 07 into 2013 that allowed maybe to unlock all that potential? Because those who covered it, we knew from Jump Street, like, this is the most talented team, but that could be, maybe I'm sitting on the side, like, that could be a little bit of a powder keg if you don't handle it right to make sure everything just stays together.
Yeah, and really that was our big challenge. And truthfully, I went to our team and said, hey, our goal is to win the national championship. But, inside I was like, hey, I just want to make sure we're motivated enough to win the state championship, because there might be one out of every 10 or 15 years, there's a team that's just so talented, they are going to win the state championship, barring multiple injuries to key people. And that happened to be that team. And so we need to have a different challenge than winning the state championship, because our guys knew they were going to do it. We'd already won 2 in a row. And what we had seen in the summer in some of the AU tournaments we'd been to, and then we'd went out of state to the Beach Ball Classic the year before, and we'd been in the championship and lost a tough game. But we knew that we were capable of competing at that level. And so when we came back in August of that year, I just said, hey, our goal is to win the national championship. And I said, for us to win the national championship, we can't lose anything in state. In fact, it can't even be close in state. And that actually was the truth. I'd call the guy at Max Preps and say, hey, how are your rankings going to be? And what do we have to do to win a national championship? And he says, well, you have to have a strength of schedule. So fortunately, our district, the Alpine School District, was great to work with. And most of the tournaments, actually all of the ones that we went to, they paid for the majority of our fees to be able to go to those tournaments. But I can't remember, we went to like 4 different out-of-state tournaments, something like that. And most of the fees were paid for. But we had to schedule the hardest competition we possibly could. I remember the one that we went back to, Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield. We played on a Monday afternoon, and we turned around and had to play Bingham on a Tuesday night. So we literally got on the bus after the game, and we got home probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and then we turned around and played Bingham that night. And that was hard, but those are the kind of things that we had to do. That's the only way we could do it, and to have a chance at it. But I just felt like if our goal was to win a national championship, that we would be highly motivated to play the kind of season that we needed to play against teams in Utah, who for us that year, if we just showed up, we were going to win by 10 or 12, truthfully, but if we played well, we were going to win by 20, which is kind of, what we needed to do to have a chance to win a national championship.
Coach, how weird was that second quarter against Brighton in the playoffs? I'm just curious, when you're on the bench there and you see them just hold the ball for 8 minutes, what's going through your mind?
It was something that we were prepared for. We'd already seen it a few times during the year. Riverton had done it to us a little bit. Some other teams had tried to do it. And we would actually be in practices at the beginning of November. And it's something that we talked about and said, this is something that we are going to see. It's going to happen during the regular season, and it's going to happen in the playoffs. And so our kids knew, and we went through specific situations. Okay, we're up 1. This is what we want to do. And they decided to pull it out. Okay, we're up 5, and they pull it out. This is what we're going to do. We're down 2. So our guys knew exactly what the situation was when we went into that. We were up 7 when they pulled it out. It was 14-7 for us. And so our guys knew, okay, we're going to win 14-7, and that's it. For us, our breaking point though was if it was a 1-possession game where they could possibly win a game and we were ahead and they had the ball, we weren't going to sit back. We would have gone out and made things happen, but we just had to say to ourselves, okay, this is how we're going to have to win the game, because as soon as somebody pulls you out like that, then now you're out of your normal defense and you're spread out and you're just asking for it.
What is the memory from that year? Because most of those games were so lopsided. I mean, even as you went out of state, I mean, I know that the Montverde game, different things. And is it the block that Shumway has on Jalil Okafor? I mean, what is it, the moment that sticks out to you from that year?
You know what? There was a lot of fun ones. We were back in Chicago and we played a team that was ranked in the top 20, and we beat them by, 30, 35. And you could see in the warm-ups they had no respect for us. And, we're in front of about 6,000 or 7,000 people, and we put on a show. And, it was right then you kind of just knew, you know what, this team could maybe, we have the experience, we have the players, we can maybe do something. And then, we got into this Palms tournament back in Florida, which is, that's the best tournament you can be in. That one is the very best. And it was really hard to get into it, and had to, talk our way into it a little. And, I remember the tournament director, who's been there forever, and he just said, you know what, if you guys can win one, boy, that'd be great. And he patted me on the back, and I said, second game, you're going to have Chester out of Pennsylvania. They had Rondé, Halls, Jefferson, and a few other guys. They had like 4 Division I guys. And they had won something like 55, 57 games in a row. And in Pennsylvania, and that was kind of the game, and we blew them out, and it was a tight game for about half, and then we got them good. And I think once that happened, then everybody knew that we were kind of for real, and that was kind of fun.
Coach, what was the greatest? I don't know how to ask this. The greatest compliment or the most positive feedback you got that year, because it was kind of that team that I think no one really took seriously until you started winning some of those big games. And obviously as that goes through and, you win the national title, what was maybe the biggest compliment that you remember receiving about that particular group from someone?
Well, we had people come to us from all these tournaments and said, you guys play so well together, and obviously you play with effort, but you guys play so well together. And that's something you have to practice doing. It's not just something that happens, it's something you have to talk about every day, because you got a guy like Nick, and Nick could go out and get 30 a game if he wanted to. He really could. And then you got Eric Mika, who's coming into the scene, and how's he going to fit in, and where's all the shots going to go? And then you have TJ, you have Talon Shumway, who could go out and get 18, 20 anytime he really wants. And so I literally had a sit down conversation with Nick and said, Nick, you averaged 20 or 21 or whatever as a junior. I think his scoring average went down, but it was really because I sat down with Nick and I said, Nick, Eric has to be a big part of this. We have Connor Toulson coming in. We have Talon. We just not as many shot attempts. You have to be more of a playmaker this year. You just have. If we're going to get what we want, and he did it, TJ did it. They all gave a little bit of themselves to be able to do it.
Well, because you go from that whole situation, and then it's how you're able to keep moving it forward. And luckily for you, a young man that's playing for the Pelicans decides that he's going to come to Lone Peak. What's that transition like? Was you're moving on, you're like, okay, what am I going to do next? I got TJ for the next couple of years. And then all of a sudden you get to pair him with this kid named Frank Jackson. I mean, that's just, to me, it's like the rich get richer. What was that like?
Yeah, that was unusual for us because Lone Peak, for maybe 10 of the 12 years that I was there, was a closed school. So it was almost like a private school, and so the only way you're going to Lone Peak is if you move in, which, Frank eventually did. But we really hadn't dealt with that because everything was homegrown. And even Eric was on our 7th and 8th grade Bantam teams. He lived right in the middle of Alpine. He was a Lone Peak kid, and then all of a sudden he left, and my big guy was gone. The 9th and 10th grade year. Unfortunately, he came back, but he was a Lone Peak kid too. And so Frank was really kind of the first kid that kind of came in. And so the other kids they kind of learned about our culture early. 6th, 7th, 8th grade, when they're open gyms, they kind of see how you kind of got to earn your stripes in our program. But Frank came in going into his sophomore year, and so that was different. And in fact, Frank didn't even play with us until it was like September because he was hurt the whole summer. And so we played the whole spring and summer without Frank, and it was interesting because we'd won the state AAU, we'd won every tournament that we'd been in without Frank that year, and so it was I had to kind of infuse him with our guys who kind of looked at like, well, hey, we're winning everything anyway, we don't need Frank, but at the same time they saw that Frank was a very good player and had a lot of talent, and and he was very, very talented.
Coach, when was that first time when you thought that Frank could be that special kind of a kid, going to Duke, one and done kind of player? When was that first time where you were like, oh yeah, he has that level of potential in him?
Yeah. So, a good friend of mine, Jeff Reinert, who was a coach at Santa Margarita High School out in California, and that's what they're in the league with Bosco and Mater Dei and all these guys. And he and I got together, and I said, hey, let's put together the best teams that we can possibly put together, and we'll fly out at the end of September, and we'll play 3 games against the best teams we can play. And he said, hey, great, let's do it. So we go out there, and it's the end of September. Frank has never played a game with us. And first game, we walk off the plane and we play Santa Margarita. I think Frank scores like 4 points. I started him. He scores like 4 points. TJ has like 37. He's unbelievable. And we win the game against a team that has 2 or 3 Division I guys. And then 2 hours later, were playing Bosco, and they had a kid from Oregon. I'm trying to remember what his name was. He was a Division I guy. They had like the Vance Jackson kid who just transferred. I can't remember what school he went to. He was at New Mexico. But they had 3 Division I players, big time guys. One went to Connecticut. He's in the NBA now. Daniel Hamilton was his name. They were loaded, and TJ was worn out. He was just worn out. He could hardly make a shot. And the next thing you know, and now I remember the kid's name. Tyler Dorsey was the kid's name. That was that we were playing against. And so Dorsey and Frank went just eye to eye, and Frank was just coming in as a sophomore, and all of a sudden Frank just went off. And here you got this kid, and he'd been horrible the first game he had ever played for us. Horrible. But this game right there, he had like 28, 30 points in the game. And I just looked at him and go, wow, this guy has a chance to be really special. And obviously he ended up being a good player. He wasn't like off the charts or anything as a sophomore, but he was a good player. And then the next year we went to Dubai of all places. And we got invited to this tournament. It was kind of an all expense paid deal. And they had like Huntington Prep, and they had Simeon and Montverde, and it was loaded with teams. And Frank had a 54-point game out there. His first game of the tournament, he had like 42 on Montverde. I mean, it was kind of his coming out party, and you got to see how good he was going to be.
So what was that transition like for you? You talk about, the whole thing was about being able to win a state championship, win a national championship. Do you feel like it just went to another atmosphere? Because you're talking about, hey, I'm talking to this coach from Santa Margarita. We're going to Dubai. I mean, what was that like for you? Did you ever take a step back and like, how did this happen?
Yeah, and it honestly was never planned. Like I said, it was never planned that way. I would get to the end of every season, and I would try to evaluate every piece of our program and critically evaluate it, and all the way down to what we did in our banquet, to what out of bounds plays we ran, to who we kept on the sophomore team, and I kind of give myself grades. Okay, that one was a D, that one was an A, and you just try to take what you did and try to make it better and see what kinds of things you could do to, like going to maybe LA in September. That was something we said, hey, maybe this can help us be better. And especially with Frank, coming in as a sophomore, hadn't played one game with us. We kind of needed him to play a few games with us. And so it's just a process. And, fortunately, once we kind of broke through what I would say is kind of a glass ceiling, then the opportunities they just flooded us, and for years we had been taking our team and going to AAU tournaments and been the only high school team, all over the place. And we'd see all these teams that are sponsored by, Under Armour, Nike, and everything. How these guys get that, or how they get invited? How, in the beach ball, how these guys get all their stuff paid for, and we only got, our hotels paid for? How does that happen? And you find out pretty quick. You just got to win. Pretty simple.
Coach, when you think back on your time at Lone Peak, what stands out to you? What do you miss the most about being able to build that program? Some of the experiences, obviously, you've talked about, traveling worldwide. What do you look back on and just miss?
For sure, the relationships. I mean, the winning was, it was great. That's fine. The winning is fun, but what means the most is the relationships you have with kids and with staff, and, I'll tell you what, the one thing I really missed, being around the staff that I had at Lone Peak. They were just class A, number one, best guys I could ever be around. They made me better for sure. And, just the other day, Nick Emery calls me, and he's on a boat, fishing for sturgeon up in Idaho, and I'm, hey, Nick, what's going on, man? Oh, I'm just, I'm fishing, man. And, that's the thing that's really neat about being a coach, is that you get to know kids and families, and that's the truth. You get to know the kid, but you also know those families and those parents, and they're friends for life, and that's really the neat part.
So the transition to BYU, how many opportunities had come to you maybe before then, or what was it about going to BYU that maybe allowed you to think, maybe it is time to try to move on from Lone Peak and take a different position?
Yeah, my wife and I, we'd had a number of different opportunities. After my second year, we had a chance to be the head coach at Dixie, and we we just didn't feel like it was the right time. We were just getting started at Lone Peak, and we liked it, and so we stayed with it. And we had a number of other things that came across the desk in time, and but I think finally it just kind of got to a point where, you know, it just sounds funny but you almost had done about as much as we felt like we could do at Lone Peak in many ways, and even though that's never true, you can always do more, but it just kind of felt that way. And so I think the timing was right for us to kind of go to BYU and get opened up, and you know, we went for it.
Coach, boy, this is going so well. I hate to do this, but that might be the first thing that now Dusty has a negative association with Quincy Lewis, that he turned down Dixie State. Dusty's not going to handle that very well.
No, why is that? Are you a Dixie guy?
Oh, I love Dixie State. Yeah, I didn't go to Dixie.
No.
I always tell kids, if you get offered by Dixie State, you just go. Like, you don't think about it. You go to St. George and go enjoy all the spoils of being in down at Dixie.
St. George, yeah.
Well, you know, the funny thing is Dixie was my dream job going through when I coached at UVSC and BYU Hawaii and things like that, because I played at Dixie. I don't know if you knew that, but I played there for Dave Rose, and so I love Dixie. And initially when they came, I was like, wow, I can't believe this. This is just a dream come true. We are all in, but it just wasn't the right time for us. Another time we would have jumped all over it, but it just wasn't the right time.
So Coach, what was the hardest transition to make amongst all of that? What was the biggest thing for you that, oh, this is no longer high school, right? This is now college. What was the biggest learning point for you in making that transition to BYU?
You know, I think the toughest thing for me was just going from head coach to assistant coach after I'd been a head coach for 12 years. And it wasn't, you know, Dave Rose was great to work with. He's just a great guy. He was great to work with and things like that. But, you know, it's like every time you open your mouth, you have to filter it a little bit in that, okay, what do I want coach, you know, what message does Coach Rose want put across the players? You know, it's not necessarily what I want, it's what he wants. And so that was really an adjustment to try and make sure I got across the message that he wanted all the time, rather than maybe something that was just natural for me and that was going to come out. That was the hardest thing. It wasn't the X's and O's and all those things. That really wasn't the issue at all, you know, with that transition. It was more of just being an assistant coach.
And, you know, talk about this transition now that you're in, because it's, I want to say, uncharted territory, but certainly not something maybe you didn't see coming, right? Coach Rose retires. Maybe it didn't go the way you guys want to go, which it only happens one of two ways. Either you're having the Lone Peak experience where I've accomplished everything I've ever wanted to accomplish, or it's we're not getting where we want to go and there's a transition. What's that been like for you? I mean, because I think we were all kind of had, you know, I know what I was thinking when you first went there. I'm like, there's the heir apparent. You know, so what's this transition been like for you this last year?
Yeah. And, you know, obviously you have the highest hopes, and, you know, maybe things don't always work out, the way you want them to work out, you know, and that's just part of life. But I'll tell you, the BYU guys, you know, Tom Homo and Brian Santiago and those guys, they were great. You know, they treated me with a lot of respect, and nothing but respect for BYU and the school and the athletic department there, for sure. But I was fortunate enough, you know, once I didn't get that job, to be offered the full-time AD job at Timpview, and it was kind of what me and my family kind of needed, you know, for this year. You know, it was, you know, stable, and it's really close. We're just a mile or two from the school, and it really worked out well, working with great people, and you know, just really fortunate that it worked out. We just, you know, we had 4 or 5 different college situations we could have went to, and that would have taken us, you know, a number of places, but that's not really, you know, what we wanted to do. So,
Coach, what was it like this year? Timpview, I mean, the boys basketball team makes an impressive run in the state tournament, you know, to the championship game. What was it like for you to be the AD, not the coach, right? Did you find yourself kind of under a similar restraint, or what was that experience like for you, not being on the sideline but watching that boys team make their run?
Boy, I tell you what, during the state championship week, I just smiled and relaxed. You know,
it was the most relaxed pregame I'd ever seen you in. I know that much.
No, it was nice. It was really good to see that, Kev do a really nice job with him on that run, because they kind of had a hard time during the season where I think that they probably expected more from themselves than what they did. And then they made a really nice run, and they had a chance there at the end. And you look at it and you say, boy, anytime you're making it to a semifinal or championship, you feel really good about how your season ended, whether you won it or not. That's a great job. So I was just happy for all those guys, and but to say that I kind of enjoyed the year without having any pressure.
All right, so some fun questions. I won't ask your favorite player, but if you got one shot of all the Lone Peak boys, who's the play being drawn up for?
Oh, geez, that is. Boy, now you're really giving me some hard questions, right here.
I wasn't going to go 7. I wasn't going who you're 7 deep, but you didn't substitute that much. So I don't know if you get to number 7. So I was just going to go with this one.
Well, you know what? Maybe the most clutch shot that a Lone Peak guy ever made was when Tyler Haas hit one against Davis. So that's pretty hard to say. You're not going to give the ball to Tyler Haas, but I wouldn't be against giving it to Nick or to Jackson or to TJ, either. So
we covered all of those guys. I'd go to Tyler if I'm not throwing at the rim to Mika, but it's.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of guys. You look Bracken Funk, Josh Sharp. I mean, there's a lot of guys that were fantastic players, just really fantastic players, But yeah, we were fortunate to have some good players for sure.
Coach, what's the year that you look back on in your time at Lone Peak and think, man, that was just a special year? Doesn't, not necessarily the best team, but you just think back on and they overcame so much, or man, I just didn't have that expectation of what they were able to accomplish. What is that year for you?
Maybe my first year, because I didn't know what to expect necessarily. For all I knew, maybe I was going to go 7-20 and not be that great of a coach or anything like that, or run a good program. You just, as an assistant for years and years, every assistant thinks this way. Hey, I know better than that guy sitting 6 inches from me. I let me have my chance. Right? And then you move those 6 inches over, and all of a sudden you figure out, what, this is a little bit tougher. I got done with my first year, and I was like, wow, I'm glad that year's over, because I've got a lot to learn. I got to go to work this summer and be ready for the following year. But my third year at Lone Peak, we'd had kind of a tough year, and we had a lot of young kids coming back, and we ended up having a great year. We won state championship, went 24-1, but it was really special because, we'd had two really good years, but then we had a tough one, and you're like, okay, who are we? Are we a flash in the pan? Because, hey, a lot of people can win one, but can you win 2, 3, 4? That's really when you take another step, right? And who are we going to be as a program? And we really came together. I was really proud of that team, and that was a heck of it. That was maybe a team that people forget about a little bit, but they were loaded. They just were a fantastic team with Brian Rios and Landon Clegg, Tyler Haas, Kevin Lindquist. That was a really fine team. Bracken Funk. And then the other team would have been Nick's freshman year. We lost to Bingham in the state tournament, and at that time, I guess it would have been considered the second round. They had home games at home site, so we played at Bingham, who was number 1 in the state that year. And we went 17-6, and we were really young. Nick was a freshman, Talon was a freshman, Brody Berry was a sophomore, and we just it was just a battle, and we had to scrap and scrape for every single thing that we got that year. And we were in a tough region. I think Alta won it that year with Kyle Davis. Mm-hmm. But we had to just scrap for every single thing that we got, and I was really proud of that team. And that was one of my only years that we didn't win over 20 games, but we won 17 that year, and I go, man, that might have been the best we'd ever done, with a group.
What's the game that, well, maybe it's a game. Who's the forgotten Lone Peak night? I had 2 questions, and I decided to go with this one. I think it's a little clearer, a little easier for you. But who would you consider during that era? Who's the forgotten Lone Peak night?
Boy, there's a lot of kids who flew under the radar that were really important guys. Zach Frampton, Connor Toulson, Talon Shumway, those guys. Brody Berry was a 3-year starter that really didn't average a lot of points, but kind of sat in between TJ and Nick and got him the ball, and didn't have an ego that I need to do this or that or the other. Ryan Rios was another kid that was a kid like that. But we had a number of guys who were just maybe a little bit under the radar like that. And the great thing about those guys is they were really talented guys, but they bought into what we were trying to do. And they could have transferred and went to another school and averaged 17 or 18 and maybe got some more individual accolades. But what we just preached was it's all about team. And if team isn't the most important thing, then Lone Peak's not the place for you.
Coach, with all your experience, your time building Lone Peak at BYU, if you could go back to a young Quincy Lewis or to a young coach today, what would be the message that you would share with them?
Boy, I learned a lot. I think, like I said, after my first year at Lone Peak, we'd had success, but I felt like I missed out on a lot of things. And really after my third year, and we had kind of struggled a little bit, I kind of went back to the drawing board, and that's kind of when I said, you know what? After every year, I'm going to reevaluate every little piece of our program and try to make whatever it is better. And you have to, like I said, you have to critically evaluate, because if you're not honest with yourself, then you're not going to get any better. And so I would do that. I mean, basically the Monday after the state tournament, I had a list, and I would start going down that list for how we ran our youth programs to every single piece of it. We'd interview with every kid in the program and their parents, and I would get ideas from them because, really it's a number of pieces of the program all going in the same direction. Parents, players, administration, school, and all those pieces are important. And what their thoughts are all important. I guess, today's terms, you might call them, your stakeholders, right? But you have to understand what all those stakeholders, what their interests are, and maybe they can help you be better. And really from an X and O standpoint, I think everybody has a comfortable style that they like, for a coach. But I would watch video after video after video in the off season, just instructional videos of things that I thought I maybe wasn't as good at teaching, recording NCAA tournament games and watching, different teams I thought could maybe apply to us because they had a player that was similar to ours, and just trying to get better every year. I think that was one of the biggest things is you just never be satisfied with where you're at. Just try to get better as a program and as a coach.
Well, Coach, we're better from spending some time with you, and we always appreciate your time. And I feel like we grew up with you because we were so young. Dane and I were 21 and 22 when we started covering you, and it's.
I do remember. I remember sitting up there at Brighton with you. I think it was Tyler Hosier, and who are these guys? But I like what they're doing. But who are these guys?
Just a couple of dorks. We certainly appreciate it, and it was so fun. I remember a couple of years ago, you came up to me after a game at Timpview. You said, "Hey, who's some guys we're missing?" And I always appreciated that. You're like, "Who's an underrated player?" or something like that. And I just always knew that you were watching, that you put your time in, that you not only that you care about Lone Peak, you care about the state of basketball in Utah, and just always appreciated how kind you've been to us over the years.
Well, you guys have been great. You guys are absolutely great for high school athletics, and I truly mean that. Even though you guys are both goofballs, and whatever, but you guys are the best. And I know that I'm not the only one who feels that way.
Well, Coach, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming and sharing some story. Oh, got to do this. Hall of Fame member of Wagner. How often do you tell your guys, "Hey, go where you need to go," because you never know when you're going to be a Hall of Famer where you choose to go to? How can I forget that? Wait till just now.
I'm trying to convince my 14-year-old son that I actually was a decent player in my day and was in the Hall of Fame at Wagner. I don't know if he still doesn't believe me, but that's a whole nother conversation of going to the level that you need to go to. Not trying to go to a level that's higher than maybe what you're at.
Well, you can get the highest level. We appreciate it, Coach, so much, and stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, fellas.
Well, first, we said it on there, but Quincy gave us so much time, so generous to this time, and what a great interview, and just someone that we really, really appreciate taking the time that he did to give us so much access as he did today.
You know, it's so fun to be able to see a coach like Quincy and to see him come into a program, build it. And there's a lot of coaches in this state that do that. And you think, man, why don't they get other opportunities? And Quincy's been one of those few that's been able to take that and then go to that next level and have a D1 coaching experience. And so great to be able to hear him talk through his story, not only at Lone Peak, but some of his time at BYU. And man, there's so much more that we could have gotten to, but just time constraints didn't feel like we could. We'll try to see what we can do about that in the future. But man, just so fun to hear some of those stories and reminisce, right? I mean, you talk about we kind of grew up with some of those Lone Peak teams, and I think back, I still remember that tournament at, up at Weber State, that state championship in Bracken Funk, and just fun to be able to think back on some of those times and talk with him. And you talk about, a coach, a program that all of us should just be so grateful for, and being able to watch and follow that, but for the notoriety that they brought to this state, and to hear him share some of those experiences going internationally and being able to help build some of these young men and provide them with the opportunities to continue to play in this great game.
Well, not only that, it was the way that he did it too. Those teams were so good, and they were really, it was one of my favorite things, and most people might remember this, when they won a state championship, the student section would start chanting, "We love Quincy." And he had just endeared himself to that program, and he was that program. And I want to talk about that a little bit more, but certainly appreciate him for what he's for his willingness to come on and talk with us. And I don't know what the future holds for him. We'll never try to break any news without having any type of information on it. But hopefully, you saw some age come back to his face, not having all the pressure and of a season on him. But hope you enjoyed that interview. We got plenty more coming up this week and others. If you have any ideas or people you'd like us to talk to, hit us up on Twitter at DNews Rewind, at Dane_Stewart, or at Dusty Litster, and we'll do our very best to line those up. So for Vince Francis and Dane Stewart, I am Dusty Litster. Thanks for joining us and watching Deseret News Rewind on Deseret.com, presented by Heidemann Associates, brought to you by the Utah Army National Guard.